very much. In the introduction, you mentioned the book I wrote actually was a novel, which might be very surprising because of the experiences I had in Brussels, I thought people should actually know how the system functions. And the title of the book is from a song of Jacques Brel, which describes the time before the First World War when Brussels was a very rich city and everyone was enjoying life and no one saw the crisis coming. And this is what I thought was a good picture of what I saw coming up for the EU if we didn't manage to have to overcome the democratic deficit, because I realized how much more the institutions got involved with daily life of the citizens in the member states without having the necessary democratic legitimacy. So in a certain sense, what I predicted then, and that's also the reason why I joined Frank, because apparently we share a common sense of wanting to anticipate things, it's actually happening now, but it turns out better than I thought in the beginning, than I thought then, because I think this is what I'm going to elaborate about. The crisis will be overcome by the European Union. If I talk here about the Euro crisis, as it's called in the newspapers, I think yesterday Ambassador Norland has brought forward perfect proof that there's no crisis, or at least the crisis is already overcome, because he showed a cover of Time magazine which was called Decline and Fall of Europe. And if you think about 2005, the bloggers in the field who were interested in the real estate bubble said the perfect counter-indicator that the bubble was about to explode was a Time magazine cover which read, "Do we all get gaga over real estate?" So it's a perfect indicator. If they speak about the decline and fall of Europe, actually it means Europe is perfectly on track and is about to overcome the problems that lay ahead. I mean, it's a common fact. The crisis. It's a common fact that whenever newspapers talk about things as crisis, this is not where the real problems is. The newspapers the media have missed out on all the decisive events in the last couple of years, whether it was the demise of Bear Stearns, whether it was the subprime crisis, whether it was the default of Lehman Brothers, whether it was the double dip. Whenever the newspaper thought there was a problem ahead, that was not the problem which actually occurred, but the problem came from another directions. So if we speak about the Euro crisis, it would be a bit superficial to say we don't have a crisis. But the crisis is not a crisis of the currency, it's a crisis of the debts we have. There's no doubt about it. Greece has a debt problem, Ireland has a debt problem, Spain has a debt problem, Portugal has a debt problem. But states have been defaulting over the centuries by the hundreds. Even the US, I'm not even sure if you were aware, but practically the US defaulted in 1971. When they cut off the standard, the gold standard, they were saying we cannot pay our debts according to the international obligations we have to give to exchange 1 ounce of gold always for $35, and the gold price went up in the following years up to $800 an ounce. Argentina has defaulted in the 2000s. Spain has defaulted more than once in 1 century in the Middle Ages. No, actually in the 16th century. So we do have a crisis, but it's a crisis of debt, and it's a crisis of the debts of banks, of financial investors, and of the financial markets. What is very likely to happen is that we will see a default of Greece, but the default will mean a haircut of 50% for the private investors. I mean, of course, you can discuss the numbers. It could be 40%, it could be a haircut of 60%. Let's say will be a haircut of 50%, and the rest of the debt will be turned into Euro bonds or bonds guaranteed by the European Rescue Fund. So whenever the crisis is drummed up by the media, you could also say that the Euroland is following by the decision it takes in order to manage the crisis. Ever since the debt problem of Greece have appeared, Euroland has taken action. In May 2010, they installed the European Rescue Fund with a very important sum of money in order to be able to guarantee the Greek debts. ECB has got new powers, which were actually against what was written in the Maastricht Treaty and the statute of the European Central Banks, but they just do it because politically they had no other choice to do it. So, and now just recently, the volume of the European Rescue Fund has been extremely raised, just to make Euroland fit for facing an eventual default or having to guarantee debts of larger European economies like Italy or Spain. So what we actually see is what people have always said should happen when the currency of the euro was introduced, that we should have some sort of transfer union or debt solidarity, and this is about to take place. The problem which is emerging now here is, if you talk about a transfer solidarity, if you talk about guarantees of a European fund, which means of taxpayers from other member states for the debts of other states, you also have to talk about control of the state budget. So the states which will be under the danger of defaulting are not sovereign in their budget rights anymore, and that's a violation of a basic principle of democracy, because in parliamentarian democracy, it's all started with the budget rights of parliaments. So if you, as a citizen, expect your government to raise taxes and to spend money according to the will of an institution which you have not participated in electing, that's a breach of democracy, which is extremely violating basic principles of democracy. So this is a problem which has to be addressed. And the way it can be addressed actually will be the following. We are very convinced that this is going to happen. We will have and see very soon, we expect it to happen before 2015, a trans-European referendum on a constitution for Euroland. Not even for the EU, because some member states, as you all know, the UK does not want to join the euro and will not have a say in it. But we need a stronger political union within Euroland members, and this can only be done by a constitution which will have to be accepted by all member states and the citizens of all member states, which necessarily means a trans-European referendum, so a constitution which will not be accepted by the member states, but by all citizens of Eurolands, the Eurolanders. In this constitution, we will have to fix rules for a common financial policy, for common economic policy, for common commercial policy, probably for common industrial policy. And we have to make sure that in the future we will be able to avoid trade balances. Because if you talk about debts are always obligation to someone who sold you goods. Debts are the result of trade imbalances. So this is something we have to address, because Germany, for instance, is just a very successful exporter of goods, because in Germany we have created a so-called low-income labor market. 25% of German workers and employees now work with jobs which are not well paid enough in order to assure a life guaranteeing retirement once they retire after 40 years of work. So people would, in that kind of job, they would work for 40 years and they would not get enough retirement benefits in order to be above the poverty level. These are the problems we will have to address. By 2015, once this constitution finally adopted and applied, we expect the other member states, which are so far not in the euro to join. They even have the legal obligation to do so by the accession treaties. Sweden, for instance, should have joined already a long time ago. It didn't do it in opposition to its legal obligations. It might stay out. UK is we expect it most definitely to stay out of it, but the other 25 or 26 states will join and to form a huge Euroland political union and a new sovereign on the European continent. And then it will be the time also to think about a common foreign and defense policy. So the crisis actually is very beneficial for Europe. What Europe did not achieve after the Maastricht Treaty, in which already was written the necessity to have a political union, is forced upon the politicians of Europe by this crisis in order to make Europe fit for the Euroland fit for the future. So we will discuss later, and especially in the second panel today, the future of the transatlantic relationship. I would just like to make some preliminary remarks on the future of NATO, because I've already talked about the common defense policy. I think NATO only has a future as it stands if we put the relation between the US and the European states on a common footing. So far, in the NATO, the US has a still clear military leadership, and it's not, in the future, will not be acceptable for European states just to be following as a junior partner American leadership, because in Europe the perception is very much that the US has lost its leadership role. Actually, US has lost Europe in a lot. If you compare it to a couple of years, I can give you indications why I think the US is much less seen as the sole superpower in the world. If you think about the German finance ministers who reacted very strongly to a proposal of the US financial minister Geithner and told him more or less just to care about his own business, that was unthinkable a couple of years ago. A couple of years ago, Schäuble was infamous for saying we need the American leadership, and even then most people in Europe didn't understand what he meant. Why we should desperately just need American leadership, while the Americans were going down what most people in Europe thought the entirely wrong road. If you think about people like Sarkozy, who is called in France the American or Baby Bush, he's definitely going to be voted out of office in 2012. Denmark had a very US-leaning government which was voted out just recently. And you can see it even in daily life. That's more of a personal remark, but my wife is Norwegian, and in Scandinavia, the US was extremely popular. And in recent years, you see when there's a new popular spot, restaurant, or whatever popping up, it's much more likely to get a national name, like a Norwegian or Swedish name, or a French name, or even a German name. But it's almost never that you see like it used to be, that to be modern, it had to be something had to have an American term. This is something that's completely, it's like a page that has been turned. The crisis, or the way the crisis has been handled by the Anglo-Saxon media is perceived almost as a betrayal of the US, like an attempt to get rid of a serious competitor. The euro has developed into the second most important reserve currency after the dollar, and it could even become more important. So this is the reaction of the US, or the action taken by the Anglo-Saxon media, is really seen as some sort of unfair competition to a competitor who has got all the rights to be on the playing field. Just to round up my remarks, I'm not saying that Europe doesn't face, or Euroland doesn't face any problems. We have problems with social cohesion, we have problems with unemployment, we have problems with the demographics, we have problems with trade balances, we have problems with the future of the social states, and we have the problem of creating common European public services. So there's a lot of things to do, But I'm positive the crisis, as it's spelled out now in the media, is not the future of the Europe. It's not the future of Euroland. We will overcome this in a way that Euroland will come out stronger out of this so-called media-called crisis. Thank you very much.